My parents canceled my graduation party for my sister's feelings. So I left. And months later, they watched my Stanford success on the news. Growing up, I honestly believed every family had a favorite child. In mine, that child was my younger sister, Emily. She wasn't a bad person. In fact, she could be funny, creative, and incredibly charming when she wanted to be. But somewhere along the way, my parents decided that protecting her feelings mattered more than acknowledging anyone else's accomplishments. That became the rule our entire family lived by. If Emily lost a soccer game, nobody was allowed to celebrate anything for the rest of the weekend. If she failed a test, my parents postponed family dinners because they didn't want her feeling pressured. If someone else received praise, they somehow found a way to redirect the conversation back to Emily. At first, I didn't think much of it. I was the older sibling. I was told to be understanding. I was told that Emily was more sensitive. I was told that one day she'd grow out of it. She never did. Neither did my parents. By the time I reached high school, I had learned to keep my achievements quiet. Honor roll certificates stayed inside my backpack. Science competition medals stayed in my bedroom drawer. Even after winning a statewide engineering contest, my parents spent dinner discussing Emily's disappointment over not making the school musical. It became easier not to expect congratulations. Fortunately, I had one person who noticed. My physics teacher, Master Lawson. He was the first adult who looked at me and said something that completely changed how I saw myself. He told me I belonged somewhere much bigger than our small town. He encouraged me to apply for national scholarships and universities I had never even considered. When I laughed and said students like me didn't get into schools like Stanford, he simply smiled. Then he handed me an application packet. From that day forward, every afternoon became another college preparation session. Essay revisions, interview practice, scholarship applications, research projects. While everyone else assumed I was hanging out after school, I was quietly building an escape plan. I never told my parents how serious I was. Partly because I didn't think they'd care. Partly because I didn't want another accomplishment becoming another family argument. Months passed. Application season ended. Then came the waiting. One rainy afternoon, I opened my email while sitting alone in the school library. The first words on the screen made my hands shake. Congratulations. I read the sentence 5 times before it finally felt real. I had been accepted to Stanford. Not only that. The financial aid package covered nearly everything. For the first time in my life, I saw a future that belonged entirely to me. I wanted to tell someone immediately. Instead of calling home, I walked straight to Mr. Lawson's classroom. He read the email, smiled wider than I'd ever seen, and quietly said, "I knew you could do it." Ironically, the first person to celebrate with me wasn't family. It was a teacher. Graduation arrived 2 months later. I finished near the top of my class. Several teachers, classmates, and relatives promised they couldn't wait for my graduation party that Saturday. For once, I allowed myself to be excited. Maybe this would finally be one day that was about me. I should have known better. 3 days before the party, my mother asked me to sit down. She looked uncomfortable. My father wouldn't even make eye contact. Then they explained that Emily had been crying ever since hearing relatives planned to attend my celebration. She felt everyone would be comparing her to me. She said she'd feel invisible. So my parents had made a decision. They canceled my graduation party. Just like that. They called relatives. They canceled the catering. They told everyone we'd celebrate another time. There was never going to be another time. My mother reached across the table and told me she hoped I'd understand. She reminded me that I would have many opportunities in life. Emily, on the other hand, was struggling emotionally. My father added that making one small sacrifice for my sister wasn't too much to ask. I looked around the room. Neither of them seemed to realize what they were asking. It wasn't about a party. It was about 18 years of always being expected to step aside. And for the first time in my life, I decided I wasn't going to. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. There wasn't even a dramatic confrontation. I simply nodded, went upstairs, and closed my bedroom door. For the next hour, I packed 2 suitcases. Everything important fit inside them. My laptop, a few clothes, my acceptance letter, the scholarship documents, a framed photo of me and Mr. Lawson after the engineering competition. That picture meant more to me than almost anything else in the house. Before leaving, I placed a handwritten note on my bed. It wasn't angry. It simply said that if my biggest accomplishment couldn't be celebrated because it hurt someone else's feelings, then maybe I no longer belonged in a home where my success was treated like a problem. I wished them well. Then I walked out the front door. No one stopped me. I spent the next few weeks sleeping in my Aunt Karen's guest room. She had always suspected something wasn't right in our family, but I had never talked about it. After hearing what happened, she didn't ask many questions. She just hugged me. Then she said something that stayed with me. "Sweetheart, parents are supposed to make room for all their children. They aren't supposed to make one child disappear so another can shine." It was the first time anyone had put my childhood into words. Graduation day came and went. Instead of a family celebration, my aunt took me to a small Italian restaurant. It wasn't fancy. There were no balloons, no speeches. Just the two of us sharing pasta and chocolate cake, while she proudly took dozens of embarrassing photos. It turned out to be one of the happiest nights of my life. A week later, I moved across the country. Stanford felt like another planet. Everyone around me was brilliant. For the first month, I was convinced admissions had made a mistake. Then classes started. I worked harder than I ever had before. I joined research labs, tutored first-year students, applied for internships. Every opportunity reminded me why leaving home had been the right decision. Meanwhile, my parents rarely called. When they did, almost every conversation revolved around Emily. She was changing majors. She was upset about a roommate. She wanted help paying for a spring break trip. Not once did they ask how I was adjusting to college. Eventually, the calls became less frequent. I stopped expecting them altogether. By my sophomore year, one of my professors invited me to assist on a renewable energy research project. The work eventually attracted attention outside the university. Our prototype won a national innovation competition. Several news outlets covered the project. Then something happened that none of us expected. A major television network asked to feature our research in a segment about young scientists developing affordable clean energy technology. The interview lasted less than 10 minutes. I answered questions about engineering, teamwork, and why I wanted my work to make a difference. I never mentioned my family. I didn't even think about them. The segment aired on a Sunday evening. I watched it with classmates in the student lounge, laughed at how nervous I looked on camera, and went back to studying for midterms. The next morning, my phone exploded. Missed calls, voicemails, text messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. One message simply read, "Your parents just saw you on the news." Apparently, my family had been visiting my grandparents when the segment aired. According to my cousin, the room went completely silent the moment my name appeared beneath the Stanford logo. My grandmother started crying. My grandfather announced, "That's my grandson." My parents just stared at the television. They had no idea I had become part of a nationally recognized research team. They didn't know I had published my first paper. They didn't know I had earned another scholarship. They didn't know because they had never asked. For the first time in years, they realized they had been watching their own child's life unfold, as strangers. That evening, my mother called again. This time, I answered. Her voice trembled before she even said hello. She told me she had no idea I was doing so well. I quietly replied that there had been plenty of opportunities to know. She just hadn't taken them. Neither had Dad. There was a long silence. Then she asked the question I never expected to hear. "Can we start over?" I looked out the window of my dorm room. For years, I had dreamed about hearing those words. Now that they had finally been spoken, I honestly didn't know the answer. I didn't answer my mother's question right away. Instead, I told her I had a midterm the next morning and needed to get back to studying. She sounded disappointed, but she understood. At least, she said she did. For the next few weeks, she called once every Sunday. Sometimes I answered, sometimes I didn't. The conversations were awkward. She asked about my classes, my research, the weather in California. It felt like two strangers trying to force a relationship that should have existed years earlier. Then one evening she admitted something that surprised me. After the news segment aired, she had gone into the attic looking for old photo albums. She wanted to find pictures of my graduation. There weren't any. Not because they had been lost. Because there had never been a celebration to photograph. She told me that was the moment everything finally hit her. Every milestone she had promised to make up to me someday had simply disappeared. There would never be another high school graduation. There would never be another chance to throw that party. Some moments only happen once. A month later, my father called for the first time in nearly a year. He wasn't good with emotional conversations. He cleared his throat several times before speaking. Finally, he apologized. Not with dramatic speeches, not with excuses. Just a simple apology. He admitted he had spent years taking the easy path. Whenever Emily became upset, he gave in because it stopped the conflict. He convinced himself that asking me to sacrifice was harmless because I rarely complained. Only after I left did he realize silence wasn't the same as acceptance. Silence was resignation. I appreciated his honesty, but honesty didn't erase 18 years. Winter break arrived sooner than expected. My parents invited me home for Christmas. I almost declined. Then my Aunt Karen reminded me that forgiveness didn't require forgetting. She said I could always leave if things hadn't truly changed, so I agreed to visit for 3 days. Walking into the house felt surreal. Everything looked the same, yet everything felt different. My room had been left untouched. The first thing I noticed was a framed newspaper clipping sitting on my old desk. It was the article about our Stanford research project. Beside it sat another frame. Inside was a printed copy of my acceptance letter. I had never given them one. My mother admitted she had downloaded it from the photo I once texted to my aunt. For the first time in my life, something I had accomplished was displayed proudly in the family home. Dinner that night was quieter than I remembered. Nobody interrupted when I spoke. Nobody changed the subject. My parents actually asked questions about my life, and listened to the answers. Emily barely said a word. After dinner, she asked if we could talk privately. We sat on the back porch where we used to play as kids. She stared into the yard for a long time before speaking. Then she admitted something I had never considered. She hadn't asked our parents to cancel my graduation party. She had cried because she felt like a failure after watching me receive scholarship after scholarship while she struggled in school. She expected our parents to comfort her. She never expected them to erase my celebration. When she found out they had canceled it, she was embarrassed. She wanted them to change their minds. Instead, they insisted it was already too late. She confessed she had been too ashamed to tell me. I didn't know what to say. For years, I had blamed her for everything. Now I realized our parents had made the decision on their own. Emily had benefited from their favoritism. But she had also been trapped by it. She told me something else. Ever since I left, our parents had started expecting her to fill the emotional role I used to carry. Whenever they argued, they leaned on her. Whenever they felt guilty, they apologized to her instead of fixing the real problem. She said she finally understood how exhausting it was to constantly manage everyone else's emotions. For the first time since childhood, we talked like siblings instead of competitors. Not every wound healed that night. Some never will. But understanding replaced assumptions. When I flew back to Stanford after Christmas, my suitcase was a little heavier. My mother had quietly slipped something inside. It was a small photo album. The first page contained pictures from my childhood. The last page was empty except for one handwritten sentence. It read, "We can't give you the memories you deserved, but we hope you'll let us be part of the ones still to come." I closed the album and sat silently for a long time. For years, I had imagined success would be the moment my parents finally recognized me. Watching me on the news hadn't changed the past. It had simply forced them to see what they had spent years overlooking. And sometimes, seeing the truth is the first step toward earning a second chance. A lot of people expect stories like mine to end one of two ways. Either the family magically becomes perfect, or everyone cuts each other off forever. Real life is usually somewhere in the middle. My parents never became perfect parents. I never became the son who forgot everything overnight. Trust isn't rebuilt with one apology or one emotional conversation. It's rebuilt through small choices, repeated over time. Over the next few years, they kept making those choices. They came to my college graduation from Stanford. Not because anyone reminded them. Because they wanted to be there. This time, they arrived early. They sat in the front row. When my name was called, my mother cried openly while my father stood and applauded louder than anyone else. After the ceremony, my dad looked at me and quietly said, "We should have celebrated you a long time ago." It wasn't a perfect sentence, but it was the one I had waited my entire life to hear. As for Emily, our relationship slowly became something neither of us expected. We stopped competing. Because we finally realized we had never been competing with each other. We had both been living under expectations that none of us created. Today, she's a teacher who helps students struggling with confidence. She once admitted that growing up as the favorite child came with its own pressure. The fear that disappointing our parents would make all that attention disappear. I never understood that when we were younger. Now I do. People often ask whether succeeding was the best revenge. The truth is, it never felt like revenge. Getting into Stanford didn't heal my childhood. Being on the news didn't erase years of feeling invisible. Success doesn't rewrite the past. It simply gives you the freedom to build a different future. If there's one thing I hope someone reading this remembers, it's this. Never make yourself smaller just to keep someone else comfortable. The people who truly love you won't ask you to hide your light so someone else can shine. And if they do, you have every right to find a place where your accomplishments are celebrated instead of apologized for. Looking back, I don't remember the graduation party that never happened. I remember the life I built after I stopped waiting for permission to be proud of myself. My parents missed one of the biggest milestones of my childhood because they were too busy protecting one child's feelings. Months later, they watched their son from Stanford on the evening news, realizing they knew more about my life from a television broadcast than from their own conversations with me. That moment didn't make me successful. It simply showed them the cost of taking someone for granted. In the end, the greatest achievement wasn't earning a degree from Stanford. It was finally believing that my worth had never depended on whether my own family chose to recognize it. Thanks for reading.